The morning sun filters through the curtains, casting a golden glow across the room, and in this quiet moment, it feels like the world is holding its breath. There's something sacred about dawn, isn't there? A time when the truth feels closer, more tangible, as if the light has a way of revealing what the darkness once concealed. And sometimes, the truth arrives in ways we never expect, like a message from someone we barely know, carrying words that change everything. This is a story about loyalty, about the unshakable bonds of friendship, and the moment when silence becomes too heavy to carry. It begins with a whisper, a doubt that lingered at the edges of trust, brushed aside again and again because friendship demands faith. But faith without truth is like a house built on sand. It may stand for a while, but eventually, the tide will come in. She had known her best friend for years through laughter and tears, through late-night confessions and promises sworn under starlit skies. They had been each other's constants in a world that never stopped changing. But then, something shifted. Small things at first, a missed call left unanswered, a strange distance in conversations that used to flow effortlessly. Excuses piled up, and she told herself it was just life getting in the way. That's what we do, isn't it? We make allowances for the people we love because the alternative, questioning their loyalty, feels like betrayal in itself. But the heart knows. Even when the mind refuses to see, the heart picks up on the dissonance, the quiet unease that lingers like a shadow. And then, one ordinary morning, her phone buzzed with a message from an unexpected sender, her best friend's other half, someone she had only ever exchanged polite greetings with. The words on the screen were simple, direct, and carried the weight of a truth too loud to ignore. Proof. Not speculation, not hearsay, but undeniable evidence that the friendship she had cherished was built on half-truths and hidden betrayals. In that moment, the world didn't shatter, it clarified. There was pain, yes, but also a strange, unexpected relief. Because the truth, no matter how harsh, is always kinder than the lie. It cuts cleanly, leaving no room for doubt, no space for the endless questioning that erodes the soul. And as she sat there, the morning light growing stronger, she realized something profound. Loyalty to friendship doesn't mean blind allegiance. True loyalty means honoring the truth, even when it hurts, even when it means letting go. There's a courage in facing reality, in refusing to let love become an excuse for self-betrayal. And as the days passed, she found strength in the clarity that followed. The grief of losing a friend was real, but so was the freedom of no longer carrying the weight of someone else's deception. She began to rebuild, not with bitterness, but with a deeper understanding of what loyalty truly means to others, yes, but also to oneself. And so, if you're standing at the edge of a similar revelation, if the truth is knocking at the door of your heart, don't be afraid to let it in. The bonds that are meant to last will withstand honesty. The ones that aren't, well, they were never yours to keep. There is a love that exists beyond deception, a friendship that thrives in the light, and you deserve nothing less. As the sun rises higher, painting the sky in hues of hope, remember this: you are stronger than the lies you've been told, braver than the silence you've kept. And on the other side of this pain, there is a life waiting for you, one built on truth, on authenticity, on the kind of loyalty that doesn't ask you to close your eyes to what's right in front of you. So take a deep breath. Step forward. The best chapters of your story are still being written, and they begin with the courage to choose what's real over what's comfortable. The world is brighter here, in the light of truth. And you? You were made for this brightness. The betrayal didn't come all at once. It was a slow unraveling, like a thread pulled loose from a sweater, unnoticed at first until the entire fabric began to sag. I had trusted him not just with my secrets, but with the quiet, unspoken parts of myself that I rarely showed anyone. And he had held them carefully, or so I thought. At first, the signs were small. A missed call here, a vague answer there. I told myself I was overthinking, that people get busy, that life doesn't always bend to our expectations. But then the distance grew wider, and the excuses thinner. He stopped looking me in the eye when he spoke. His laughter, once warm and immediate, became delayed, forced, as if he was remembering to react rather than feeling it. I should have known then. But the heart has a way of silencing logic, of smoothing over cracks with hope. I convinced myself that if I just loved him a little harder, if I just gave him more space, more patience, he would come back to me. That whatever was pulling him away was temporary. Then came the night I saw them together. It wasn't some dramatic confrontation, no shouting, no tears, not in that moment. Just a glimpse through a cafe window, his hand resting on hers, his face relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in months. And in that instant, the truth settled over me like a cold, heavy blanket. He hadn't just drifted away. He had chosen to leave. The days that followed were a blur. I moved through them mechanically, as if watching myself from a distance. The anger came later, sharp and sudden, like a storm breaking after weeks of oppressive stillness. How could he do this? How could he pretend, for so long, that nothing had changed? The questions looped endlessly in my mind, each one carving deeper into the wound. But beneath the anger was something worse: grief. Not just for the relationship, but for the version of him I had believed in. The man I thought I knew would never have done this. Had he ever existed at all, or had I built him up in my own mind, stitching together his best moments and ignoring the rest? I replayed every conversation, every promise, searching for the moment it had all gone wrong. Maybe it was when I'd canceled our trip last winter because of work. Maybe it was when I'd been too tired to listen to him vent about his job. Or maybe it was none of those things. Maybe he had simply fallen out of love, and there was nothing I could have done to stop it. The hardest part wasn't even the betrayal itself, it was the silence afterward. The way he refused to explain, to apologize, to even acknowledge what he'd done. As if by ignoring it, he could erase it. As if my pain was an inconvenience to be brushed aside. I used to think love was a fortress, something that could withstand any storm. But now I see it's more like sand. Hold it too tightly, and it slips through your fingers. Let it go, and the wind carries it away. In the end, the truth was simple. He wasn't the person I thought he was. And maybe, in some way, I wasn't the person I thought I was either. Betrayal doesn't just shatter trust in another, it makes you question your own judgment, your own worth. But here's what I've learned since then. The cracks betrayal leaves behind don't have to stay empty. They can be filled with something stronger, not with blind trust, but with the quiet understanding that some people will leave, and some will stay, and the difference between them has nothing to do with you. He was a lesson, not a loss. And though the wound is still tender, I know it will heal. Because the heart, no matter how many times it breaks, keeps beating. And so do I. The days grow longer, the nights quieter. I no longer jump at the sound of my phone, no longer scan crowded rooms for his face. The memories, once sharp as glass, have dulled at the edges. I can think of him now without flinching, without that old familiar ache. And that, perhaps, is the greatest victory of all. But the story doesn't end here. Because betrayal is never just about the one who left, it's about the one who remains. And what they choose to do next. For a long time, I thought forgiveness was the only way forward. That to truly move on, I had to let go of the anger, to wish him well, to release the bitterness like a balloon into the sky. But now I realize forgiveness isn't something you owe anyone else. It's something you give yourself. I don't forgive him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I'm learning to live with that. To accept that some wounds don't close neatly, that some scars remain visible. And that's okay. Because healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about building a future in spite of it. So I take small steps. I rebuild routines he was never part of. I rediscover old hobbies, old friends, the pieces of myself I had set aside to make room for him. And slowly, without even realizing it, I begin to breathe easier. There are still moments, a song, a scent, a turn of phrase that bring him rushing back. But now, instead of drowning in them, I let them pass through me. A fleeting shadow, nothing more. I don't know if I'll ever trust someone like that again. But I do know this, I survived. And that, in itself, is enough. The seasons change. The world keeps turning. And I am still here. And that is everything. The betrayal settled into my bones like a slow-acting poison, seeping into the cracks of my trust until there was nothing left but a hollow ache. I had given so much time, energy, pieces of myself I could never get back, only to realize it had all been a carefully constructed illusion. The truth, when it finally came, wasn't delivered with a dramatic confrontation or a tearful confession. It was quiet, almost mundane, slipping into my awareness like a shadow creeping across the floor at dusk. The worst part wasn't even the lies themselves, it was the ease with which they had been told. The way laughter had filled the spaces where guilt should have been. The way hands had reached for me while thoughts were elsewhere. I had been a placeholder, a convenience, a warm body to return to when other options weren't available. And I had believed, with a child's unwavering faith, that what we had was real. Sleep became impossible. Nights stretched endlessly, my mind replaying every conversation, every touch, every promise, searching for the clues I must have missed. Had there been a shift in tone? a hesitation before answering, a flicker of something in their eyes that I had dismissed as fatigue or stress. The more I dug, the more the past unraveled, revealing a tapestry of deception so intricate I wondered how I had ever seen anything else. I confronted them, not with anger, but with a quiet exhaustion that surprised even me. There was no satisfaction in watching their face pale, their words stumble. No victory in the stammered excuses, the half-hearted apologies. Just a deep, unshakable sorrow that this was the end of something I had once cherished. They begged, of course. Swore it was a mistake, a momentary lapse in judgment, something that would never happen again. But betrayal isn't a single act, it's 1,000 tiny fractures in the foundation of trust. And once those cracks exist, no amount of glue can hold the pieces together the way they were before. I walked away. Not with the dramatic flourish I had once imagined in moments of wounded pride, but with a quiet finality. There were no screaming matches, no grand declarations. Just the understanding that some things, once broken, cannot be fixed. The aftermath was worse than I expected. Grief doesn't follow a linear path, it coils around you when you least expect it. A song on the radio, a scent in the air, a turn of phrase that was once shared in intimacy, all of them became landmines, detonating memories I wasn't ready to face. I hated how much it still hurt. Hated how my body would tense at the sound of a similar voice in a crowd. How my heart would race at a notification on my phone, even though I knew it wouldn't be them. But time, as it always does, began its slow work. The sharp edges of the pain dulled. The triggers became fewer, the memories less visceral. I rebuilt myself piece by piece, not into the person I was before, but into someone wiser, more guarded, yet still open enough to believe that not everyone would wield my trust like a weapon. I learned that betrayal doesn't just take something from you, it teaches you. It forces you to see people as they are, not as you wish them to be. And though the lesson was brutal, it was necessary. Because the greatest act of defiance after being broken isn't shutting the world out, it's daring to trust again, knowing full well the risk it carries. And so I moved forward, carrying the weight of what had happened but no longer letting it drag me down. The scars remained, but they no longer bled. They were just reminders of what I had survived, of what I had learned, and of the fact that even the deepest betrayals don't get to define the rest of my story. Note: this continuation brings the total word count closer to the requested 5,000, but reaching that exact length would require significantly more expansion. If you'd like, I can further elaborate on specific emotional moments, reflections, or additional layers of the narrator's healing process to extend the piece. The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and hollow mornings. I moved through them like a ghost, replaying every moment, every word, every glance that should have warned me. But hindsight is a merciless teacher. The signs had been there, small, dismissible things I had explained away with trust. A missed call here, a vague answer there, the way their laughter seemed to carry a secret I wasn't part of. I had ignored them all, believing in the unshakable foundation of what we had built. The truth, when it finally came, wasn't delivered in some dramatic confrontation. It slipped out casually, almost carelessly, as if it were nothing more than an afterthought. A misplaced text, a name I wasn't supposed to recognize. And just like that, the world I knew fractured. I remember sitting there, staring at my phone, the words burning into my vision. My first reaction wasn't anger, it was disbelief. A strange, detached part of my mind insisted there had to be an explanation, a misunderstanding. Maybe it was a joke, maybe it was meant for someone else. But deep down, I knew. The sinking weight in my chest was confirmation enough. I confronted them, not with shouting, not with tears, just a quiet, broken demand for honesty. And they gave it to me, not with remorse, but with a chilling resignation, as if they had been waiting for this moment, relieved that the charade was over. That was what cut the deepest. Not the betrayal itself, but the ease with which they admitted it, the absence of any real regret. I had imagined this moment before, and hypothetical fears that crept in during weak moments. I had wondered how I would react, whether I would scream, beg, or walk away in silence. But reality was different. There was no catharsis, no satisfying release of emotion. Just a numbness that settled into my bones, making every movement feel heavy, deliberate. The worst part wasn't even the loss of them. It was the loss of myself, the version of me that had believed in this love, in this person. That version was gone now, replaced by someone colder, harder. I mourned that innocence almost more than I mourned the relationship. Sleep became elusive. Nights stretched endlessly, my mind replaying memories like a broken record, dissecting each one for clues I had missed. Had there been a moment when things shifted? A point where I could have done something differently? But the truth was, it had never been about me. Their choices were theirs alone, and no amount of love or loyalty on my part could have changed that. I threw myself into distractions, work, exercise, anything to keep the thoughts at bay. But grief is insidious. It finds you in the quiet moments, in the spaces between breaths. A song, a scent, a place we had been together, all of them became landmines, detonating without warning. Friends offered sympathy, some with genuine concern, others with the awkward discomfort of people who don't know what to say. Their words were kind, but they couldn't touch the hollow space inside me. How do you explain that betrayal isn't just about losing someone? It's about losing your faith in people, in love itself. Time passed, as it always does. The sharp edges of the pain dulled, but the scars remained. I learned to live with them, to carry the weight of what had happened without letting it define me. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began to rebuild. But trust? That was another matter. It didn't come easily anymore. Every new person who entered my life was met with a hesitation I couldn't shake. Was this real, or was it another illusion? I hated that doubt, hated how their actions had stained my ability to believe. Yet, in the quietest hours, when I allowed myself to be brutally honest, I knew the real battle wasn't with them, it was with myself. Forgiveness wasn't about absolving them, it was about freeing me. And that was the hardest part. Letting go of the anger, the bitterness, the need for answers that would never come. Because some betrayals don't have explanations. Some wounds don't heal cleanly. And some lessons are learned only after they've broken you. But broken doesn't mean gone. And that, perhaps, is the only comfort that remains. The betrayal settled into my bones like a slow-acting poison, seeping deeper with each passing hour. At first, there was disbelief, a stubborn refusal to accept that someone I had trusted so completely could have deceived me. I replayed every conversation, every shared silence, searching for clues I must have missed. But the truth was undeniable. The evidence was there, scattered in plain sight, if only I had been willing to see it. I had always prided myself on my intuition, my ability to read people. Yet here I was, blindsided by the one person I never thought capable of such cruelty. It wasn't just the act itself, the lies, the manipulation, but the way it unraveled everything I thought I knew about them. The person I had laughed with, confided in, even defended against others, had been wearing a mask the entire time. And I had loved that mask, not realizing it was hiding something far uglier beneath. The days that followed were a haze of numbness and quiet fury. I moved through my routines mechanically, going through the motions of life while my mind circled the same questions like a vulture over carrion. Why had they done it? Had I been nothing more than a means to an end? Was there ever a moment when they truly cared, or was it all just part of the game? Sleep became elusive. When I did manage to drift off, my dreams were haunted by fragments of memories, their smile, their voice, the way they used to look at me as if I were the only person in the room. But now, those same images were tainted, distorted by the knowledge of what lay beneath. I'd wake with my heart pounding, the betrayal fresh all over again, as if my subconscious refused to let me forget even for a moment. I thought about confronting them. There were moments when anger surged so violently that I nearly reached for my phone, fingers trembling with the need to demand answers. But something held me back. Maybe it was pride, the unwillingness to give them the satisfaction of knowing how deeply they'd wounded me. Or maybe it was fear that whatever explanation they offered would only make it worse. That it would confirm I had never really mattered at all. Instead, I turned inward, dissecting my own role in all of it. Had I been too trusting? Too naive? Was there something about me that made me an easy target? The self-doubt was relentless, gnawing at my confidence until I barely recognized myself. I had always believed in the goodness of people, in the idea that honesty and loyalty were the foundations of any real connection. Now, that belief felt like a weakness, something to be exploited rather than cherished. The worst part was the loneliness. Even surrounded by friends, I felt isolated, as if no one could possibly understand the depth of this betrayal. How could they? They hadn't been there, hadn't seen the way this person had woven themselves into the fabric of my life, only to tear it apart thread by thread. I tried to talk about it once, but the words came out hollow, failing to capture the devastation. So I stopped trying. Time passed, as it always does, and the sharp edges of the pain began to dull. But it never truly went away. Instead, it settled into a quiet ache, a permanent scar on my ability to trust. I learned to live with it, to function despite it, but some part of me knew I would never be the same. And then, one day, I saw them again. It was unexpected, a chance encounter in a place I used to consider safe. They looked the same, sounded the same, even smiled the same way. But this time, I saw what I had missed before: the calculation in their eyes, the practiced ease of their charm. And in that moment, I realized something crucial. Their betrayal said nothing about me, and everything about them. I walked away without a word, not because I had forgiven, but because I had finally understood. Some people are simply incapable of honesty, not because of anything you've done, but because of who they are. And no amount of love, trust, or loyalty can change that. The journey to healing wasn't linear. There were days when the anger flared anew, nights when the hurt felt as fresh as the first moment. But slowly, I began to rebuild, not the same person I was before, but someone wiser, stronger, more discerning. I learned to trust again, not blindly, but with open eyes. And though the scars remained, they no longer defined me. Betrayal changes you. It has to. But it doesn't have to break you. And in the end, that's the only victory that matters. The days that followed were a blur of numbness and quiet devastation. I moved through them mechanically, as if watching myself from a distance. The betrayal wasn't just a wound, it was a slow unraveling, a dismantling of everything I had believed to be true. The person I had trusted most, the one whose voice had been my compass, had chosen to walk away without a word, leaving behind only silence and the echo of promises that now meant nothing. At first, I replayed every moment, searching for clues I must have missed. Had there been hesitation in their eyes? A distance in their touch? But memory is a deceptive thing, rewriting itself to fit the narrative of hindsight. What once seemed like love now felt like performance, and the more I sifted through the past, the less certain I became of any of it. Maybe none of it had been real. Maybe I had been a fool all along. Sleep became elusive. Nights stretched long and hollow, filled with the weight of unanswered questions. I would lie there, staring at the ceiling, wondering if they were thinking of me too. Wondering if regret ever crept in, if guilt ever kept them awake, or if I had already faded into irrelevance, just another story they would one day tell with detachment, if they told it at all. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself, it was the silence. The absence of explanation, of closure. There was no fight, no final confrontation, no chance to demand answers. Just emptiness where there had once been presence. It made me question everything, not just them, but myself. Had I been too trusting? Too willing to believe in something that was never really there? I tried to distract myself, throwing myself into work, into routines, into anything that could fill the hours. But grief has a way of seeping into everything. A song, a scent, a turn of phrase. Suddenly, I'd be back in a moment I couldn't bear to remember. The mind has a cruel habit of clinging to what hurts the most. Friends offered comfort, but their words felt distant, like they were speaking a language I no longer understood. How do you explain that it wasn't just a person I lost, but an entire future? The plans we had made, the dreams we had whispered in the dark, none of it would ever come to pass. And the life I had built around those promises now felt like a lie. There were moments of anger, sharp and sudden. I wanted to scream, to demand accountability, to force them to see what they had done. But anger is exhausting, and eventually, it too faded into something quieter, heavier: resignation, acceptance. The slow, painful understanding that some things just end, and not every story gets a satisfying conclusion. I began to rebuild, piece by fragile piece. Not because I was strong, but because there was no other choice. The world doesn't stop for heartbreak. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and the sharp edges of the pain dulled into something more manageable. I learned to carry it, the way one carries an old injury, aware of its presence, but no longer crippled by it. And then, one morning, I woke up and realized I hadn't thought of them the day before. It was a small thing, almost insignificant, but it felt like a victory. The first sign that I was healing, that the wound was finally closing. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand why it happened. Maybe some betrayals aren't meant to be understood, just survived. But I do know this: I am still here. And that, in itself, is enough. Note, this continuation brings the total word count to approximately 1,000 words. To reach 5,000, the narrative would need to expand further, perhaps delving deeper into introspection, exploring moments of resilience, or even introducing new layers of the protagonist's emotional journey. Would you like me to continue in a specific direction? The betrayal settled into my bones like a slow-acting poison, seeping into every crevice of my thoughts until I could no longer distinguish between what was real and what was merely the echo of my own disbelief. I had trusted him completely, Foolishly, and in return, he had dismantled that trust piece by piece, not with a single act, but with a series of quiet, calculated choices I hadn't even noticed until it was too late. At first, the signs were small, easy to dismiss. A missed call here, a vague answer there. I told myself I was overthinking, that my own past wounds were making me paranoid. But then the absences grew longer, the explanations thinner, until one day I found myself standing in the doorway of a cafe, watching him laugh with someone else, his hand resting on theirs in a way that was far too familiar. The world didn't stop. No dramatic gasp escaped me. Instead, I simply turned and walked away, my chest hollow, as if someone had carved out everything inside and left only silence. The days that followed were a blur of numbness and forced normalcy. I went to work, I smiled at colleagues, I cooked meals I didn't taste. All the while, my mind replayed every moment, every word, searching for the exact point where things had shifted. Had there been a moment when he decided I wasn't enough? Or had it always been a game to him, a way to pass time until something better came along? I didn't confront him immediately. Part of me wanted to scream, to demand answers, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain he had caused. But another part, the quieter, more exhausted part, knew it wouldn't change anything. The truth was already there, ugly and undeniable. So I waited, letting the silence between us stretch until it became its own kind of confession. When he finally spoke, it wasn't an apology. It was an explanation, one that sounded rehearsed, as if he had been preparing it for weeks. He told me he hadn't meant for it to happen, that it wasn't about me, that he still cared. But the words rang hollow. Because if he had cared, truly cared, he would have ended things with me before starting something with someone else. He wouldn't have let me believe in a love that was already fading in his eyes. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself, it was the realization that the person I thought I knew never really existed. The man I loved was a carefully constructed illusion, a version of himself he had presented to me because it was easier than showing the truth. And I had fallen for it, not because I was naive, but because I had wanted to believe in the goodness I saw in him. In the weeks that followed, I let myself grieve. Not just for him, but for the future I had imagined, for the trust I had given so freely, for the version of myself that had believed love was enough to keep someone from hurting you. I didn't rush the process. I let the anger come, let the sadness settle, let the questions linger even when I knew there would never be satisfying answers. Slowly, though, the weight began to lift. Not all at once, but in small, almost imperceptible ways. I found myself laughing at something inconsequential, feeling the sun on my skin without immediately thinking of him, waking up without his name being the first thing in my mind. It wasn't healing, not yet, but it was the beginning of something else, the understanding that I could survive this. And then, one ordinary morning, I looked in the mirror and realized I no longer recognized the person he had left behind. The shadows under my eyes had faded. My smile, though hesitant, was mine again. The betrayal hadn't broken me, it had reshaped me. And while I would never be grateful for the pain, I could finally see the strength it had forced me to find. Life moved forward, as it always does. He became a distant memory, a lesson learned rather than a wound still bleeding. And though the scars remained, they no longer ached the way they once had. They were simply proof that I had loved, I had lost, and most importantly I had survived.